Hi, I'm Sophie, I'm 22, and I never thought my own father would be the reason my college dreams almost disappeared. I trusted him with my future. Until one quiet office visit shattered everything I believed about family and sacrifice. What I discovered that day changed my life forever. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more family drama, emotional courage, and real-life revenge stories. I still remember the smell of old carpet and paper when I walked into the financial aid office that morning. It was the kind of place that always made me nervous even on good days. I had my backpack on one shoulder, coffee in my hand, and a list of questions I thought were small. I was there to confirm details, nothing more. I had no idea that within minutes, my entire future would feel like it had been quietly erased. The woman behind the desk smiled politely as she typed my name into her computer. Her fingers paused. She leaned closer to the screen, then typed again. The smile faded just a little. She asked me to confirm my date of birth, then my student ID number. I answered without worry, still sipping my coffee. That was when she cleared her throat and said, "Sophie, it looks like there's no remaining balance in your college fund." I laughed at first. It slipped out before I could stop it. I told her there had to be a mistake. My dad had been saving since I was a kid. He talked about that fund like it was untouchable. She turned the screen slightly toward me and pointed at a row of zeros. No funds. No pending deposits. Nothing waiting for the next semester. Just empty space where my plans used to live. My hand started shaking. I asked her to explain it again, slower this time. She spoke gently, like someone trained to deliver bad news. According to the records, the account had been drained months ago. The withdrawals were approved. Everything was processed cleanly. Legal. Final. I felt my face go warm as the words settled in. Months ago. While I was studying for finals. While I was trusting. I walked out of that office in a fog. The hallway outside was loud with life. Students laughing. Shoes squeaking on tile. Someone arguing about a group project. I stood there, frozen, holding a folder that suddenly felt heavier than it should. No one noticed me. No one knew my world had just shifted sideways. I sat on a bench outside the building and stared at my phone. I called my dad. It rang 4 times before he picked up. I asked him one simple question. "Did you touch my college fund?" There was a pause. Not a short one. A heavy one. The kind that tells you the truth before words arrive. He said my name slowly, like he was bracing himself. That's when I knew. He told me we would talk later. That it wasn't a good time. That I shouldn't panic. Panic. I hung up without answering. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. I replayed every memory of him telling me not to worry, that everything was handled, that my job was to focus on school. Those words echoed differently now. They felt hollow. I walked back to my dorm in silence. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside my room, I sat on my bed and stared at the wall. I thought about the late nights studying. The part-time job I quit because he said I didn't need it. The trust one never questioned. I felt foolish for believing that love always protected you. That evening I drove home. The house looked the same. Warm lights. Familiar porch. My mom was in the kitchen, stirring a pot like it was any other day. She looked at me and immediately knew something was wrong. I asked where Dad was. She said he'd be home soon. Her voice was too careful. When he walked in, he didn't look surprised to see me. He set his keys down slowly and sighed, like he'd been expecting this moment. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where he helped me with homework when I was little. I asked him why. He rubbed his face and said he had loans. Old ones. Ones that were catching up to him. He told me he didn't want to lose control. That he meant to replace the money. That he thought he had time. Each sentence felt like another crack in something I couldn't repair. I asked why he didn't tell me. He said he didn't want to worry me. That answer hurt the most. My mom stayed quiet. She didn't defend me. She didn't argue with him. She just stared at the table. That silence felt like a second betrayal. I realized then that this wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A quiet one. Made without me. That night, I lay in my childhood bed staring at the ceiling. I felt smaller than I had in years. Not because I was weak, but because the ground beneath me was gone. Everything I thought was stable suddenly felt uncertain. I didn't cry right away. I just felt empty. As the hours passed, Anger slowly replaced shock. Not loud anger. Focused anger. The kind that asks questions. The kind that remembers details. I replayed his words. The timing. The approvals. The way he assumed I would understand. That assumption changed something inside me. By morning I knew one thing for sure. My future had been taken quietly. But I wasn't going to stay quiet about it. Not anymore. I stayed sitting on the edge of my childhood bed after sunrise, listening to the house wake up. Cabinets opened. Water ran. The soft sounds felt wrong, like life was pretending nothing had changed. My chest was tight, but my mind felt sharp. I walked into the kitchen knowing this conversation couldn't wait another hour. Dad was already there, holding his coffee like it might protect him. Mom stood by the stove, eyes fixed on the pan, shoulders tense. I pulled out a chair and sat down without asking. The wood was cold under my palms. No one spoke. The silence felt thicker than anything I'd known. I need the truth, I said. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. Not later. Not softened. Dad exhaled slowly and sat across from me. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. Older than I remembered. That almost made me stop. Almost. He nodded once. I used the money, he said. All of it. The words landed heavy but clean. No excuses yet. Just fact. I waited. He wrapped both hands around his mug. The loans were catching up. Interest kept growing. I was losing sleep. I thought if I cleared them, everything else would work out. I asked him why my fund was the answer. He looked down. Because it was there. Mom flinched at that. I noticed. I didn't look away. That money was for my future, I said. You said it was mine. I know, he replied quickly. I always planned to put it back. Planned. That word burned. Plans don't pay tuition. I asked when he was going to tell me. He hesitated again, longer this time. I could see him choosing words like stepping around broken glass. I hoped you wouldn't need it yet, he said. I thought I had time. I laughed once. Came out sharp. You watched me study. You watched me move into my dorm. And you still said nothing. Mom finally turned around. Her eyes were shiny, but she didn't cry. He was scared, she said softly. We both were. I looked at her. And I wasn't worth knowing? She opened her mouth, then closed it. That answer hurt more than anything Dad had said. He leaned forward. I didn't think you'd understand, he said. You were focused. I didn't want to distract you. That wasn't protection, I said. That was control. He stiffened. The word hit him. I saw it. He tried to push back. I did what I had to do for this family. I am this family, I replied. My hands trembled now, but I didn't pull them back. And you decided my future was optional. The room felt smaller. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking time like it always had, except now it sounded accusing. Dad rubbed his forehead. I raised you, he said. I paid for everything before college. That doesn't give you the right to take from me, I said. Not without asking. He looked at Mom like he expected support. She stayed quiet. Her silence felt heavier now, weighted with choice. I realized then she had known longer than I wanted to believe. How long? I asked her. She swallowed. A few months. The air left my lungs. And you let me plan my life anyway. She nodded, tears finally spilling. I told him to tell you. He kept saying tomorrow. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. I stood up and paced the small kitchen, every step pulling up memories. Birthday dinners. Holiday laughter. All of it felt cracked now. Dad's voice dropped. I didn't think it would hurt you this much. I stopped and faced him. You didn't think at all. That landed harder than yelling ever could. His shoulders slumped. For a moment I saw guilt. Real guilt. But it didn't fix anything. I asked where the money went exactly. He explained the loans. Credit cards. Old mistakes he never talked about. Each detail made the decision feel smaller, more selfish. Not desperate. Just afraid. I realized he wasn't a monster. He was something harder to face. He was human. And human choices still break things. I trusted you, I said quietly. I never checked. Never asked for proof. I believed you because you're my dad. He nodded slowly. I know. That was all he said. No apology yet. Just acknowledgement. I sat back down feeling drained. What did you expect me to do? He hesitated. I thought you'd work something out. You always do. That assumption settled heavy in my chest. He had counted on my strength to cover his weakness. I'm not invisible, I said. I'm not endless. Mom reached for my hand. I let her touch me, but I didn't squeeze back. I wasn't ready. Dad finally said he was sorry. The words were quiet, real. Too late. I believed he meant them, and that made it worse. Because regret doesn't undo choices. We sat there a long time after that. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just three people staring at a truth none of us wanted. When I stood to leave, Dad asked what I was going to do. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something important. I'm going to figure it out, I said. But not the way you expect. He nodded, unsure. I walked out of the kitchen knowing one thing clearly. The truth had finally come out. And nothing between us would ever feel simple again. I walked out of the house that morning with my keys in my hand and a strange calm in my chest. The truth had been said. Nothing more could be pulled out of that kitchen. I drove back to campus knowing I was carrying something heavier than my backpack. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. And that clarity scared me more than shock ever had. The email came 2 days later. It was polite. Too polite. It explained deadlines, balances, options. I read it 3 times before the words settled. Without payment, I couldn't stay enrolled. No extensions. No special exceptions. I sat at my desk staring at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, waiting for a solution to appear. Nothing did. Packing my dorm room felt unreal. I folded clothes slowly, like if I moved carefully enough, the moment would pause. My roommate asked if I was going home for a bit. I nodded. I didn't explain. I didn't trust my voice yet. She hugged me at the door, and I held on longer than I meant to. When I handed in my keycard, the front desk clerk smiled and wished me luck. I wondered how many students walked away like this every year. Quietly. Without an audience. Without anyone knowing how much it cost them. Back home, time felt different. Days stretched. Nights came too fast. I applied for jobs with a kind of urgency I'd never felt before. I took the first one that called back. It wasn't glamorous. It paid hourly. It required standing longer than I thought I could. I told myself it was temporary. That word became my shield. Work taught me things school never had. How to listen without reacting. How to smile through exhaustion. How to hold frustration in my chest and still finish a shift. I learned the weight of money. How fast it disappears. How slowly it comes back. I stopped waiting for messages from friends. Everyone was busy with midterms and group chats I was no longer part of. I scrolled through photos of campus life like I was watching someone else's story. It hurt less that way. At night, I replayed conversations in my head. Things I wished I'd said. Things I hadn't known how to say yet. I thought about my dad often. Not with rage. With distance. I realized something uncomfortable. I had always been the responsible one. The easy one. He had counted on that. So had I. One evening after work, I sat in my car and cried. Not loudly. Just enough to let it out. I wasn't crying because I missed school. I was crying because I felt replaceable. Like my dreams had been negotiable. The next morning, I opened a notebook and started writing everything down. Expenses. Goals. Anger. Hope. It became my place to be honest without being interrupted. I wrote until my hand hurt. Then I wrote some more. I picked up extra shifts. I learned which coworkers talked too much and which ones quietly helped when you needed it. I learned how to ask for what I deserved without apologizing first. That was new. Mom called sometimes. She asked how I was doing. I told her I was fine. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the full truth. Dad stayed quiet. Part of me appreciated that. Part of me resented it. Silence can feel like space or avoidance. I didn't know which this was yet. One afternoon, a customer complained about something I couldn't control. My manager stepped in before I could respond. Later, she told me I handled it well. That comment stayed with me longer than it should have. I realized how rarely anyone had noticed my effort before. I started to see myself differently. Not as a student waiting to graduate, but as a woman learning how to stand without a safety net. It wasn't empowering in the way movies make it look. It was slow, messy, real. There were days I wanted to quit everything and sleep. Days I missed the library and the quiet focus of studying. Days I felt embarrassed when someone asked where I went to school. I learned how to answer without flinching. I took time off, I'd say, and I meant it. One weekend I ran into an old classmate at the grocery store. She asked how classes were going. I told her the truth. She didn't pity me. She nodded like she understood. That moment mattered more than I expected. I began to notice my thoughts changing. I stopped asking why this happened and started asking what I could do next. That shift was small but powerful. It didn't erase the hurt. It gave it direction. I looked into programs. Not commitments yet. Just information. I realized my education wasn't gone. It was delayed. There's a difference. Knowing that didn't fix everything, but it gave me room to breathe. One night Dad knocked on my door. He asked if I had a minute. I told him I was tired. He nodded and said he understood. He didn't push. That restraint surprised me. Maybe we were both learning. I spent more time alone, and it wasn't lonely the way I feared. It was clarifying. Without expectations pressing in, I could hear my own voice. I liked her. She was quieter, stronger, less willing to bend. I learned how to budget, how to say no, how to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to fix it. None of that came from textbooks. Months passed. Seasons changed. I didn't feel behind anymore. I felt different, like I had stepped off one path and found another that required more attention. One evening after a long shift, I caught my reflection in the store window. I looked tired, but steady. I realized something important in that moment. I wasn't just surviving this. I was shaping myself through it. Losing school forced me to see who I was without titles or plans attached. It stripped away assumptions and left choice behind. I didn't like how it happened. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But I couldn't deny the result. I was learning who I really was. And that lesson, painful as it was, belonged to me alone. I stood in my room that night, staring at the old bookshelf I hadn't touched in years. The house was quiet in a way that felt different now, like it was holding its breath. I pulled books down one by one, not looking for anything specific, just trying to keep my hands busy. That's when a thin folder slid out from behind a stack of notebooks and landed at my feet. I bent down and picked it up. The paper inside was yellowed at the edges, clipped together neatly. My name was written across the top in my father's handwriting. My stomach tightened. I sat on the floor and opened it slowly, like it might disappear if I moved too fast. Inside were statements, old letters, and a document I didn't recognize at first. I read it once, then again, slower. My breath caught. The account wasn't just a casual savings fund. It had been set up years ago in a way I never knew. My name wasn't just listed. It was tied to it. Not fully independent, but not invisible either. I felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. This wasn't about money yet. It was about truth. About what had been said versus what had been done. I realized then that my dad had never expected me to look this closely. He had assumed I would accept the story and move on. The next day, I took the folder with me to the public library. I didn't want advice from friends. I wanted clarity. I asked questions carefully, using neutral words, keeping emotion out of it. The woman I spoke to didn't react dramatically. She simply explained what the paperwork meant and what options existed. I walked out into the afternoon sun feeling steadier than I had in months. Not triumphant. Grounded. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for balance. For accountability. That evening I sat at the kitchen table again. Dad noticed the folder immediately. His jaw tightened. I placed it between us without a word. He didn't touch it at first. He just stared, like the papers might speak for themselves. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "It was always here," I said. "You just didn't think I'd look." He flipped through the pages slowly. I watched his face change. Confusion gave way to recognition. Then something like fear. He had forgotten this part. Or hoped I never understood it. "This doesn't mean what you think," he said quietly. "I know exactly what it means," I replied. My voice was calm. That surprised both of us. Mom stood in the doorway listening. I didn't look at her. This wasn't her moment to explain. Dad leaned back in his chair. I was trying to keep things together, he said. I didn't think it would come to this. You never thought I'd push back, I said. That's the difference. He sighed, rubbing his hands together. What do you want? That question hung between us. Months ago, I would have answered with emotion. Now I answered with intention. I want honesty, I said. And I want responsibility. We talked for a long time. Not arguing. Unraveling. He admitted he had hoped time would smooth things over. That I'd get busy. That life would distract me. He hadn't expected me to slow down and examine what was missing. I told him how it felt to lose school. How it felt to rebuild alone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Each sentence landed heavier because it was measured. He listened differently this time. Not defensively. Carefully. I didn't see you as someone who'd challenge me, he said quietly. I didn't see myself that way either, I replied. That was the truth. Losing everything familiar had changed me. It had taught me patience. It had taught me how to ask questions without fear. We discussed next steps without naming them directly. I wasn't there to threaten. I was there to be seen. Dad understood that. I could tell by the way he avoided my eyes when the conversation ended. After that night, things shifted subtly. He became cautious with his words. More aware. Less certain. He knew now that I was paying attention. I continued learning quietly. I kept records. I stayed informed. I didn't rush. That restraint became my strength. He never expected that. He had expected noise or silence. Not calm preparation. Mom asked me once if I was okay. I told her I was becoming okay. That answer felt honest. Weeks passed. Dad didn't bring up the fund again, but his behavior changed. He double-checked things. He hesitated before making assumptions. He realized I was no longer someone who would simply accept decisions made for her. One afternoon he tried to explain himself again. I stopped him gently. You don't need to convince me, I said. You need to face what happened. He nodded. Slowly. That moment mattered. Not because it fixed anything, but because it acknowledged something had broken. I spent more time focusing on my own plans. Saving. Learning. Preparing. Knowledge became my quiet shield. I wasn't angry anymore. I was alert. Dad once asked if I hated him. The question caught me off guard. No, I said. But I don't see you the same way. He looked down. That answer stayed with him. Discovering that folder didn't give me power overnight. It gave me clarity. It showed me that my future had never been as fragile as I thought. It had just been hidden. The one thing he never expected wasn't paperwork. It was me paying attention. And once I did, everything changed. The day I decided to take formal steps to reclaim what was rightfully mine, I felt a strange mixture of fear and resolve. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about principle. I walked into the small law office with the folder I had discovered months ago clutched in my hand, and for the first time, I realized how much power knowledge carries when it is handled carefully. The lawyer I met with was professional but kind. She listened as I explained the situation in detail, nodding and taking notes. Each word I spoke felt heavier than I expected. Each sentence carried the weight of months of silence, uncertainty, and rebuilding. We went over the documents line by line. It was tedious, yes, but meticulousness mattered. I had learned patience in the months after leaving school, and that patience now became my weapon. There was no shouting. No theatrics. Just facts. Clear evidence. I wasn't seeking revenge in the way most stories depict it. I was seeking acknowledgement and restitution. That distinction mattered to me more than anything else. When I first informed Dad that I had retained legal counsel, he didn't explode. He didn't yell. He just stared at me, the way someone does when a quiet storm finally reaches the shore. There was hesitation in his eyes, and I noticed for the first time how much age and worry had softened his face. He expected drama, probably a meltdown, maybe tears. Instead, he met calm with calm, and I think that unsettled him more than anything. He asked me what I wanted. That question echoed in my mind long after he left the room. I told him plainly. I wanted fairness. I wanted what had been taken. I wanted him to face the choices he made without excuses or deflection. There was no malice in my words, just clarity. That clarity, I knew, was something he had never anticipated. The following weeks were tense. I noticed subtle shifts in the house. Dad stopped making offhand comments about money. He paused before decisions. Even small actions like signing a check or discussing bills carried a different weight. He understood, on some unspoken level, that the world had changed for both of us. He had underestimated me. I had underestimated my own capacity to hold him accountable. One evening, as I organized paperwork at the kitchen table, he approached quietly. "Sophie," he said almost cautiously, "I've been thinking." I didn't look up immediately. I waited for him to continue. I realize now that what I did wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal. I can't take back the past, but I want to make it right as much as I can. His voice was low, but I could hear sincerity beneath the tension. I listened. That moment wasn't dramatic. There was no cathartic release. There was just acknowledgement, which in many ways was more powerful. I realized that consequences aren't always loud or explosive. Sometimes they're quiet, creeping into everyday life, altering behaviors, perspectives, and relationships permanently. Mom intervened gently, supporting his words without diminishing mine. She admitted her silence had contributed to the hurt. That honesty, combined with his, reshaped the way I saw my family. Not as villains or victims, but as humans who made decisions that had lasting effects. I understood then that consequences aren't only external. They ripple inside hearts and minds, changing how people relate to one another. The legal proceedings went smoothly. It was calm, procedural, and structured. There was no spectacle. Each session reinforced the reality that I wasn't asking for extra. I was asking for what had been my foundation from the start. Dad complied. He provided records. He met deadlines. He negotiated with a seriousness that hadn't been present before. I watched him navigate this adult world with a humility I hadn't seen him exercise in years. When the restitution payments were arranged, he didn't make excuses or deflect. He adhered to the plan, each installment a quiet acknowledgement of the past. The process wasn't easy for him, and I could tell. But it wasn't meant to be easy. Accountability rarely is. The first payment he made had a weight beyond the dollars themselves. It was symbolic, a tangible step toward balance and recognition. Our relationship shifted irrevocably. I didn't feel the same closeness I had before. I didn't pretend to. Trust, once broken, isn't easily restored. But there was a new understanding, a cautious respect. We learned boundaries without harsh confrontation. We learned to speak truths without fear of dismissal. Those lessons, though quiet, were profound. I returned to school months later, having saved diligently from work and careful budgeting. Walking onto campus, I felt a quiet pride, not because I was back in the classroom, but because I had rebuilt my life on my terms. Every step forward was earned, not handed down. Every book I purchased, every assignment completed, carried the weight of personal triumph that no amount of money or privilege could replace. Dad noticed the change in me instantly. He asked questions about classes and work, but his tone had shifted. He no longer assumed I needed guidance. He no longer assumed I would defer to his decisions unquestioningly. Our conversations became structured differently. Honest, careful, grounded in mutual awareness. I could see him processing the consequences in real time. The way people do when they realize that mistakes carry a ripple effect far beyond initial intentions. One afternoon, I found him sitting quietly in the living room, reviewing his finances. He looked up as I entered. "You've grown so much," he said, his voice soft. I nodded. "So have you," I replied, surprising myself with the acknowledgement. It wasn't meant to forgive, and it wasn't meant to absolve. It was simply recognition of change, a shared awareness that life after mistakes requires adaptation. Mom joined us and made tea, placing it carefully on the coffee table. The three of us sat in the same room, not needing to fill the space with chatter. Silence had become a tool, not a weapon. We had learned that words, actions, and even restraint carried weight. Every interaction now was tempered by the lessons of past choices, by the consequences that had reshaped us all. Through it all, I realized that real consequences aren't always loud. They don't always come with apologies, tears, or dramatic confrontations. They emerge quietly in changes to behavior, shifts in understanding, and the way people carry themselves in everyday life. Dad's respect, earned through accountability, wasn't immediate or flashy, but it was permanent. It had to be. I also learned the depth of my own resilience. Facing the loss of school, rebuilding my finances, and navigating my family's altered dynamics revealed capacities I hadn't known existed. I discovered patience, focus, and quiet determination. I discovered the ability to hold people accountable without letting anger define my actions. Those lessons, far more than the money, shaped who I became. Even small moments carried significance. A conversation about groceries, a shared cup of tea, a casual question about a project at school, all became exercises in navigating trust and awareness. We were learning, together yet separately, the long-term weight of decisions and their consequences. Months later, during a routine meeting with my professor, I reflected on the journey. The setbacks had reshaped my priorities. I approached assignments differently. I invested more attention in my work. Every challenge felt more manageable because I had endured greater trials outside the classroom. The lessons of accountability, responsibility, and measured response had translated directly into my growth as a student and as a person. One evening, Dad approached me in my room. He hesitated, then said, "I've learned something important from this, Sophie. Not just about finances, but about listening and noticing." I smiled faintly. "I think we've both learned that." He nodded. The acknowledgement felt deeper than words alone could convey. It was understanding embedded in action and awareness. The past could not be changed, but the way we carried it forward could. That realization, more than any repayment or reconciliation, marked the true turning point in our relationship. By the end of the year, the restitution was complete. Dad had met his obligations. He had faced the choices he made and the consequences of those choices. I had regained my educational footing and my sense of independence. The relationship wasn't perfect. Never would be. But it was real. Structured by truth, accountability, and deliberate action rather than assumption and misplaced trust. Looking back, I realized that consequences are rarely immediate or dramatic. They ripple slowly, reshaping lives, expectations, and relationships. They teach lessons about honesty, responsibility, and self-respect. The process wasn't easy, but it was transformative. My father had underestimated me, and in the end, that miscalculation revealed more about him, about us, and about the power of measured, persistent accountability than any argument or confrontation ever could. The kitchen table, the same one where months earlier harsh truths had been exchanged, now became a symbol of calm resolution. Conversations there no longer carried the weight of betrayal. They carried the weight of understanding, tempered by accountability. Each discussion reminded us that actions have consequences, and that those consequences extend beyond financial loss into trust, respect, and mutual recognition. I finally understood something critical. Real change doesn't always need fireworks or confrontation. It needs patience, clarity, and steadfastness. My father learned that. I learned that. And most importantly, I learned that standing firm for yourself, quietly but consistently, produces consequences that last far longer than any emotional outburst ever could. By the time I returned fully to campus, I was no longer just Sophie, the student who lost her fund. I was Sophie, the woman who navigated loss, held others accountable, and discovered resilience she didn't know she had. The consequences of that year had reshaped not only my family but the way I approached life, relationships, and self-worth. They changed us forever, and in ways that mattered far more than money ever could.